It's Sunday, September 17, 2023. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we take a deep dive into the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5minutenews. Our guest today is the former Deputy Assistant Director of the FBI's Counterintelligence Division and co-host of the Cleanup on Aisle 45 podcast, Peter Strzok. Welcome back to the Weekend Show.
Anthony, thank you. It's great to join you again.
So, do you remember at the very beginning of Donald Trump's presidency, we were kind of aware that Steve Bannon had this plan to cause chaos, total chaos, so that nobody really knew what was going on in whatever direction. And this is something that I often refer to because I really feel like now the situation politically now is so chaotic that from a voter's perspective, people don't really know what's going on. It's like who's being impeached and who's been indicted. And it's like there's just so much. And, you know, those of us whose job it is to analyze this stuff, we can obviously make sense of it. But from a regular voter's perspective who doesn't keep much of an eye on the news, you know, there is a chance that you could say that Donald Trump's impeachments and now indictments have been diluted by nature of a potential impeachment of Joe Biden or an indictment of Joe Biden's son Hunter. So just before we kind of get into the weeds, just kind of react if you can to that concept of America being, I mean, it's almost a constitutional crisis as I see it.
Yeah, you know, and it's interesting too, because it's you raised 2015, and in many ways it does feel similar to me. And one of the first things I think about is like, how and if the media has failed the United States and the voting public, because it seems like we are falling into the same traps, the same, you know, you hear about Hunter Biden's indictment, you hear about this, you know, the impending impeachment inquiry, at least of Joe Biden, and it's taking on a life of, you know, a butter emails sort of thing. And the failure of a lot, not all, but a lot, far too many, in my opinion, mainstream journalists to learn the lessons of 2015, 2016, and to start drawing, whether it's false equivalencies or some deep-seated desire that, well, we have to give both sides equal time. And the reality is, no, you don't. I mean, if you were dealing with like objects, yes, ideally you would give both sides equal time. But the reality is you have one person whose son, who is not running for any office, is facing indictment, frankly, for crimes that DOJ, from the data, it looks like rarely, if ever, charges, so setting that aside. And two, you have a concern about, well, you know, an incumbent president, well, he's very old. And, you know, but Trump is just a few years younger, is morbidly obese. And so to the extent there are any health concerns, I see them as analogous. But setting those things aside, the fundamental assault on democracy, there was a hallmark of Trump's time in office and his time since leaving office, whether the January 6th insurrection, whether it's everything that's gone on since. You cannot look at these two candidates, if you're a journalist, and present them with the same light. And I think what you're seeing, the results in polling, is that the American public is listening to a large portion of the media, presenting them in the same way. And the things that were done in 2016, 15 and 16, we are repeating those same things, and we're doing it at our peril, because I'm very concerned that, you know, anytime I see polls where, you know, people would trust Donald Trump more in a crisis than Joe Biden. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? I mean, the man who wanted to know about whether or not there was, like, you know, the Chinese had a gun to shoot at hurricanes to stop them, you know, it just, you know, who got into a back and forth with Kim Jong-un about the size of his button on his desk for nuclear missiles. It boggles my mind that there's any debate whatsoever in the mind of an average American voter that there's any sort of rough equivalency between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. There's simply not. And I don't think that's a partisan thing to say. I think that is an objective statement of fact based on the record. And the fact that that is not what appears to be in the forefront of Americans' minds is really concerning. And so why do they think that? They think that because of the news they're hearing. They think that because of what their intake of information is. And all of that, you have to, I think, lay at the feet of American media.
Doesn't this also go back to, I mean, what you say about these statements not being partisan? The very nature of kind of partisan projection of American culture. So even, and I hate to bring it up, but, you know, your text message famously, you know, we'll stop him, which to me is like society is not going to allow an authoritarian character to kind of be in office. And I don't want to go over that, but that's how I read it, because as you're describing now, we're talking about the difference between somebody who is sane, as in Joe Biden, who is, when I say sane, I'm referring to him not being an autocrat, versus having America's very democracy questioned and brought into disrepute, which was already done under Donald Trump. That's the difference as you describe it and as I read it and as I see it. But people who are listening to us and people who are watching the news, they don't really care. They actually will project that it's partisan, and I'm on the receiving end of this all the time. I try and do unbiased news, and people tell me I'm biased because I'm reporting on Donald Trump factually. The bias is not in you or I. The bias is often in the people and the culture of American divided politics, the viewer or the reader.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the question I always have is, well, how do you change that? Are those people, are the people who are entrenched on either side reachable? Or are they amenable whatsoever for any sort of dialogue, which, dialogue, period, at all, in any way, shape, or form? And then from that, the next question, dialogue that has any chance or hope of changing their mind. Are they open to any sort of argument on the facts? And I don't, the proposition that I would argue is like intelligent people, reasonable intelligent people can take and have an assessment of somebody and say, they are, whether professionally, a view that they are a danger to the country, a danger to the national security of the United States, whether personally they can view somebody as being, morally abhorrent or, espousing values which are anti-democratic, and hold those beliefs at the same time go out and do their job in an objective way. I think thousands upon thousands of professionals, whether they are government employees, whether they're police officers or, folks who work at the fire department, people can have those opinions, and it doesn't matter. If somebody's house is on fire, they go and put out the fire. If somebody is, whatever the case may be, you can have an opinion and still do your job objectively. And I think that was my argument has always been that I and, most every other, certainly FBI employee at the time, but, other government employees do that every day. And that's the mark of a professional civil service that is not based on a patronage system. But what is remarkable is the way an entire party, I think, the Republican Party, has turned on its head the idea that, the FBI in particular, the Department of Justice, but that this must be weaponized because Donald Trump is being investigated and Donald Trump has been indicted, that therefore that is the weaponization of these entities. No consideration whatsoever, possibly, that these 91 indictments might be based in illegal behavior on the part of Trump. When, you can, and this isn't hidden, right? All of your listeners can go out and read the indictments in Florida and DC and Georgia and New York.
They're in different jurisdictions, right?
So different jurisdictions, state, federal, different crimes.
Yeah.
All these, coming out of grand juries, peers of the former president who listened to all the facts and voted these indictments out. And now the government is going to have to go in and prove beyond a reasonable doubt with evidence that's admissible in court that there's evidence to support these violations of law. And so for people to sit there and say, not 1, not 2, not 20, not 40, not 80, but 91 times, all these different jurisdictions, all those different grand jurors, easily 40 plus, right? 50 plus, somehow are all corrupt, all weaponized, all out to get Donald Trump in an unfair partisan way, beggars belief. And I don't know how, faced with those facts and all the other things, when we can go in and talk about everything that Trump did with Putin and Kim Jong-un and so on and so on and so on, it doesn't matter. And I don't know how you break that cycle. And I don't know who the person, if I tried to do it, they'd look at me like, I'm the MAGA Nation's monster under the bed, along with a few other people that, when they're trying to scare their children to go to sleep and stop playing games, Pete Strzok's going to come out of the closet of the deep state and get you if you don't go to sleep. So I'm not, I can talk to you and hopefully your listeners have some sort of like resonance of like, oh, this makes sense. But if you're going to get somebody to talk to the crowd that is listening to Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity and Alex Jones, who is that person? Is it Chris Christie? He's getting booed at all these, the Republican gatherings. Is it Mike Pence, who's such a milquetoast, I'm going to maybe try and screw up the courage to say I did my constitutional duty, but I'm still going to vote for Donald Trump if he's the nominee, even though he wanted to hang me on January 6th. Who is the voice that is capable of reaching those folks? And I don't know that there's one. So
there's Trump. That's it, right? That is the answer. That all of those groups that you refer to, they only connect to Trump because they're not really interested in the process of democracy anymore. It's now become a cult, and that cult worships one leader, and they're not even voting for Republicans anymore. They're voting for Trump. It just so happens that Trump has taken over the Republican Party. So beyond Trump, the party is effectively finished unless they make some serious changes now. And to all intents and purposes, they're not doing that with that. They're sticking with their man.
They are. And it is a cult, I think. And the scary thing is this isn't a 2%, Scientology sort of, some weird, Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh up in Oregon where you got, or Jonestown where you have a couple of percent or a few hundred people. I mean, you've got 20-30% of the population captured by this man. And you have a demonstrated record, right? I mean, he has lost the election. In the midterm, his candidates, the Senate candidates in particular that he endorsed, other than J.D. Vance, flamed out horribly. Those candidates who were associated with Donald Trump in the midterm elections did extraordinarily poorly. The record was not one that supports this Trump and Trumpism being a winner on the national political stage, even at these state and, congressional elections. And to see it happening again, and you see a lot of the things that are, if you look at Wisconsin and the shenanigans they're trying to do against the newly elected Supreme Court justice and movements at various states trying to push forward Trump agendas are landing with a thud. And so whether I don't understand that, yes, he has the party locked up, but when you try and translate that into a national election, I don't think it's going to go well at all. And I say that and feel a little bit heartened, but then I look at some of these polls coming out where, Biden and Trump are neck and neck, and Americans are saying they trust Trump more in a national crisis to act. It makes no sense. So I don't know, I think it's best to be concerned in a way that is positive and productive and motivating rather than, kind of terrified for the future of our nation. But it's not, I don't know how, when you get a group of people that is that large, 30+% of the population, it's more than Trump. There's something there that Trump has harnessed, but but then on the other hand is like, if and when Trump has gone from the scene, can anybody else marshal that same sort of crazy support? Or Ron DeSantis cannot. I don't see anybody able to sort of step onto the stage of the same sort of craziness and rally the base in the same way. So I don't know. I'm very uncertain about where we're headed going into the primaries next year.
And this is often the problem, that there isn't really an answer. People are very stumped about how one deals with this. I would say that the media needs to stop treating this as a business as usual situation. The business is still reporting on the election as if it's a two-horse race with two equal candidates. No mention of mental health, no mention of cults. So many experts that I've interviewed on this show that will talk in depth and at length about it. People like Dr. Bandy Lee or Dr. Stephen Hassan. They're not allowed on the news. It's almost as if the media doesn't want to talk about the kind of what's really going on, and actually just wants to pretend for ratings, I presume, or for advertising purposes, just want to carry on as if it's a regular election year between previous presidential candidates. And it isn't. This is a mental health epidemic that, Bandy Lee refers to it as a Trump contagion. Why do you think the media doesn't want to kind of go down that road and just wants to kind of carry on like it's a normal year?
Because I think, one, they want the viewership, right? I mean, they're in the battle for that 20-30% of those advertisers, and they don't want that just captured by Fox or OAN or whatever the right, wing side is. I think there's I do think at the end of the day, most of the national media tends to be more educated than the average American political person. I think they tend to be more liberal than perhaps the, whatever the middle of the road American is. And I think there is very much a concern or insecurity of being labeled, you've got elite media bias. And of course you're a lefty. Well, setting that aside, your job is to tell the truth. And if the truth happens to be that, Donald Trump is not a reasonable candidate, is a dangerous candidate for the president of the United States, is somebody who said, I'm going to suspend all the stuff. I'm going to suspend the Constitution. I'm going to, you should consider injecting bleach to combat COVID. You can just go on and on and on. The cruelty of some of the policies and things he suggested doing at the border, bordering on, putting alligators in moats and shooting people in the leg. I mean, just things that are unconscionable. It isn't unreasonable to say this man, and to start, it was Tom Nichols, he's at the Atlantic now, but he was a professor at the Naval War College for a long time, and kind of he reached a tipping point where he writes about, on the one hand, he has moved past the point of trying to have a dialogue, where engaging in people and saying, well, I understand where you're coming from, and I honor the sort of position and thoughts that you have and opinions that you have, and moving to saying, okay, we're past that. It is indefensible at this point in time if you still support Donald Trump, given the facts that are known about his behavior, about his events. If you are still nevertheless either unaware of that or aware of it and supporting it, we're beyond the point of dialogue. You should be called out on that. You should be shunned because it is fundamentally anti-democratic. And I think I think the media needs to be considering doing much more to sort of call out the fundamentally undemocratic nature of the things that Donald Trump stands for and has said. I mean, he's not hiding it. He is not pretending to be anything. He is telling you who he is. He is telling you exactly what he's going to do. And the things that he is going to do are fundamentally authoritarian and anti-democratic in nature. There's nothing hidden about it. And so why the media, nevertheless, they're spending all the time talking about, the impeachment of Joe Biden and what a burden it's going to be on his, the run for the presidency again. Well, why are you even giving that any credibility whatsoever when even, Republican congressmen are saying, there are no facts here. There are no allegations to support an impeachment inquiry. None. Zero. And you've got Nancy Mace on CNN, because CNN gives her the time of day, saying we're having this inquiry to get to those facts. We don't have any facts now, but that's why you have an inquiry. Why are you giving this person the time of the day to assert that and somehow say, oh, well, okay, then maybe it's legitimate? It's not. There's nothing there.
But by nature of her going on the news and the news not pushing back, that legitimizes the investigation for an impeachment. And this is the problem. People see it on TV with people wearing a suit and tie, and they think it must be true. And unfortunately, this is why we shouldn't take our responsibilities as journalists lightly, or misunderstand how powerful the media is, because it gives authority. And if you talk about the wrong stuff with any energy, you will therefore give it life and oxygen. And that's just dangerous for democracy, which is, let's be honest, hanging by a thread in this country. Might not feel like it because we're not in an election year, but the rest of the world is looking at the US as it's downgraded on the freedom scale, and notes that this is not a democratic country anymore.
Yeah, and people think, oh, well, we survived, right? The guardrails held up. It was not Trump. The nation was challenged and democracy was tested and the court system held. Well, what people forget is, like, America's democracy was like without a heartbeat on the emergency room table, lifeless. And, a team of physicians around there with the paddles, shocking the patient again and again, trying to get the heartbeat going, trying to get the breathing going again. It wasn't like, oh, yeah, well, we navigated through this difficult challenge. No, it was truly on the ropes. And I think people forget, either one, they don't appreciate how close, we're sitting there in December of 2018. And now we've seen through these indictments, people talking about, like, well, we use the military to seize voting machines. And if there's, civil unrest in the streets, Jeff Clark saying, well, that's why we've got the Insurrection Act. I mean, truly planning in absolute, cold blood to say, yeah, we'll wheel out the military and engage in this fundamentally anti-democratic behavior to keep Trump in power. And if there are protests, that's fine. We'll bring out the military. And unstated, but very clearly right there, and shoot and use the power of the state to put those protests down on the streets of American cities. And, America survived this challenge. But do you understand how close it was? And I think we're all just, it's like, life's good right now. Dow's doing okay. Job growth is great. It's turning to fall. Weather's nice outside. Trump's doing Trump stuff, but it's not so bad. It's really bad.
Yeah.
It's really bad.
There's a knock-on effect, isn't there? Because whilst the insurrection happened on or over a period of a few days. The riot we watched live on television on the 6th of January 2021. But the knock-on effect of the damage done to American democracy as a whole is indefinite, and certainly until change is made. And my concern is that, we take it for granted, as you say, because we're in a period of relative calm right now. But if Trump runs and loses next November, he's going to call that it's fraud again. And the clock will be reset on this whole campaign against reality. And that's what I am worried about, is that no one seems to be preparing, whether it be changing legislation or even just preparing people for what he's likely to say if he loses next year.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I do worry up to the election, the potential for violence, particularly on some fringe figure who isn't, mentally stable, who hears things that are being said and decides to engage in violence. This guy who shut up.
We've seen that already,
FBI, right? The FBI field office in Cincinnati, and other little folks stalking Obama's house in D.C. after Trump posted the address on Truth Social. I mean,
or even Tanya Chutkan having someone come after her.
Exactly.
I mean, that is just insane.
And all the folks down in Fulton County, I mean, it is there. It is going on. Whitmer, nine folks now convicted of this plot to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. So it is there, but I do very much worry that there is kind of a simmering, building discontent and mistrust and undercurrent of violence that when we hit the general election, if it is contested, if Trump refuses to concede, even if Trump is elected and people feel that, okay, now we're unleashed to seek vengeance, whether that's coming out of the administration or whether it's coming from outside of the executive branch, I worry about the period after the election through the inauguration, whoever's taking power. But that, and again, that if you have, certainly if Biden is reelected, that 20 to 30% potentially of the population, if Trump is wailing that, the election was stolen again and I'm the rightful president and we need to take up, he wants to see, I mean, it was the whole reason when he was sitting in, the stuff that everybody saw in the January 6 hearings, where Trump apparently was sitting in the little dining room outside off the Oval Office and watching the riot, watching the insurrection and people coming
and
in.
Enjoying
and
it.
Coming in and saying, you have to call him off. You have to tweet something. You have to. And he didn't, because he seemed to relish the violence. Nobody should have any illusion that for Trump, there is a two-path road. One is he wins and regains power. The other path is he burns down everything around him. And that was what because we've seen it. Again, nothing's hidden. That's what he did on January 6th. I will either have this mob march through the Capitol and stop the certification process, or it can all burn down around me. Take away the mags, take away the magnetometers. They're not here to hurt me, right? It is one or the other. My power or destroy everything. And it is a infantile 7-year-old on the playground. If I can't be the captain of the kickball team, I'm going to take everything and just leave.
Isn't that why the mental health aspect is so important? Because, let's be clear, he is a child, right? He knows nothing about anything. Do you remember when he thought that these new stealth planes were actually invisible?
Invisible, right. Like Wonder Woman's jet, right? Yes.
And this is who we're dealing with, and yet people in other breaths give him credence. And this is why it's so dangerous. And, it's all very well saying that, if, 14th Amendment, he can't run because he engaged in insurrection. There are other amendments in place to prevent people who are mentally ill from running, and no one seems to want to go down that road.
Yeah, and it's, and those folks who do, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, whatever the Goldwater rule or, whatever was enacted in place by the American Medical Association to prevent this sort of behavior, I think it is a reasonable time to question. Look, every foreign, like the United States has, and most foreign nations have groups of psychologists who do nothing but study foreign leaders and do exactly what you're talking about. I mean, they will look at every foreign leader and do psychological assessments, what makes them tick, what motivates them, what they like, what they don't like, how to appeal to them, what's going to make them angry. And we do that. As a matter of fact, we pay medical professionals to do that for every foreign leader. Why we should somehow keep off limits, not just somebody's opinion, but if you have like board certified people who can sit there and train to do this and look at the, behavioral characteristics, and gosh knows our presidents are among the, under the greatest microscope of most anybody in American public life, is a public statement the same as somebody's statements when they're sitting on on the couch talking in a counseling session? No, but there's certainly enough observed behaviors that a trained professional could, I think, look at and make a reasonable assessment of what's going on. And dozens
have made an assessment, and right. Papers have been written, published papers have been written, peer-reviewed papers have been written. I mean, it's not like the work hasn't been done. But, there could be laws enacted that says that if you have if you've been indicted, then you can't run. If you've been impeached, you can't run. There should be more. But unfortunately, the checks and balances, they're just not up to standard. And in every other country, I mean, look, to be in the FBI, you've got to follow a whole bunch of rules and regulations to even get past the first interview, I have no doubt. But to be the president, nothing. You can have done anything.
Yeah, and that was, the founders got tremendous amount right, but I think they never could have envisioned somebody like Donald Trump actually progressing to the part where somebody like that was able to obtain the nomination of one of the primary parties, one of the, in a two-party system. Whether or not they envisioned that, isn't clear. But I think the assumptions that went into the debates around the Constitution, the creation of the Constitution, and the laws that came from that, it truly, and that's another, again, not to harp on the failures of the media, there is a fundamental underappreciation of just how unique and outside the scope of normal behavior Trump is compared to every other president in the history of the United States. I mean, it's not even close. He is such an extraordinary outlier. I mean, if you were to look at like the bell curve of distribution, you maybe had like most presidents, 1.5 standard deviations away from the center, but Trump is way out, in like the 98th, 99th percentile. And again, there's nobody on either side anywhere near it. And to be able, that isn't a partisan statement. That isn't a statement of opinion. That is a statement of fact. And for people to be unwilling to say that just as a matter of fact, without saying, well, we don't want to offend anybody. We don't want to like appear that we're taking sides. You're not. There was this amazing graph where it was like, the number, they had the presidents from Washington up through, Biden, and then they had on the vertical axis the number of indictments, and it's like all zero, except for Trump up at 91 and then back to zero. I mean, there has never been anything like this, and to simply not be able to say that unchallenged is, we're headed into another 12 months. We're in mid-September, right? So another 14 months. That is going to be, I fear, exactly a replay of 2015 and 16.
And he's going to fight like hell, to coin a phrase. He is never going to go quietly, because his mental pathology will not enable him to be like, something, there's so many charges, there's so many indictments. Yeah, okay, they've probably got me. I should now just go. He'll never do that. This guy is going to fight to the end, even if it means running his campaign from a prison cell. We have to take a quick pause for our sponsor, but I want to come back and talk about an interview that he gave a few days ago with Megyn Kelly, where he identified Vladimir Putin as somebody who would give him a positive reference in this situation. Back with more from Peter Strzok in just a moment. I've always found it difficult to find clothes that I like to wear, and when I find one thing that works, I just buy loads of them and just wear the same thing all the time. Well, men's closets were due for a radical reinvention, and Rhone stepped up to the challenge. Rhone's commuter collection is the most comfortable, breathable, and flexible set of products known to man. And here's why. Rhone helps you get ready for any occasion. The commuter collection offers the world's most comfortable pants, dress shirts, zips, and polos. You'll never have to worry about what to wear when you've got the Rhone commuter collection. The comfortable four-way stretch fabric provides breathability and flexibility that leaves you free to enjoy what life throws your way, from your commute to work or your 18 holes of golf. It's time to feel confident without the hassle. With Rhone's wrinkle release technology, wrinkles disappear as you stretch and wear the products. It's that easy. And with Gold Fusion anti-odor technology, you'll be smelling fresh and clean all day long. And on top of that, Rhone is 100% machine washable, so you can ditch the dry cleaner altogether. I personally love a technical fabric, something that is advanced and uses technology to make a more comfortable and more modern outfit. Now, the commuter collection can get you through any workday and straight into whatever comes next. So head to roan.com/Anthony and use promo code Anthony to save 20% off your entire order. That's 20% off your entire order when you head to RHONE.com/Anthony and use code Anthony, ANTHONY. It's time to find your corner office comfort. Rocket Money has saved me money by alerting me to subscriptions that I didn't even know I still had. Are your subscriptions draining your wallet? The average person has around 12 paid subscriptions, and they might not even remember subscribing to half of them. If you have no idea just how much you're spending each month, then you need Rocket Money. It's a great app that tracks all of your expenses so you know exactly where your money is going. There's subscriptions for everything these days, from streaming services to fitness programs, and sometimes it feels impossible to keep tabs on what you're paying for every month. That's why I'm such a huge fan of Rocket Money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills, all in one place. With Rocket Money, you can easily cancel the ones you don't want with just the press of a button. No more long hold times or annoying emails with customer service. Rocket Money does all the work for you. It also lets you monitor all your expenses in one place. It recommends custom budgets based on past spending. They'll even send you notifications when you've reached your spending limits. With over 3 million users and counting, Rocket Money customers have saved an average of $720 each year. Stop wasting money on things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and manage your money the easy way by going to rocketmoney.com/weekend. That's rocketmoney.com/weekend. It's The Weekend Show. I'm Anthony Davis. Peter Strzok, Megyn Kelly did an interview with Donald Trump on Thursday this week for SiriusXM, and he kind of perjured himself a few times. He admitted the crimes a few times regarding stolen documents, keeps going down this road of, oh, well, it's the Presidential Records Act, I'm covered, when he wasn't. Previously he'd said this document he was showing people was a newspaper, and now he kind of didn't say it was a newspaper, which suggests that it was a classified document. There was so much to unpack in this, and I do find it interesting, depending on who Trump is being interviewed by, will depend how much he opens up, because he kind of forgets who's watching, and for some reason he forgets that everything he says can be used in evidence against him. That old phrase. I don't know why, maybe he hasn't heard that. It hasn't been read his rights enough times over the years. But I want to focus just initially on his talk about Vladimir Putin, because Russian media takes US media, far-right media, for example, Alex Jones stuff, which they rip off of, not YouTube because he's banned off YouTube, I think Rumble or wherever he posts his stuff, and they show Russian citizens to show that the US is now thinking the same as Putin is thinking with regard to the war in Ukraine and other things. But also Donald Trump actually highlighted something that Vladimir Putin had said to effectively try and give him a pass. He pointed to sympathetic comments from Putin to try and bolster his case that he's being treated unfairly by prosecutors in the US. So Putin asserted on Tuesday that the criminal cases against the former US president are political revenge that show the fundamental corruption of the United States. Peter, you were at the very center of the first Russia investigation. So you understand who the enemy is in this conversation. And yet we have a former president who is running again, who is referencing propaganda being said by an enemy of the state to try and support his cause. I mean, this is very dangerous and very serious. How does that make you feel?
Immensely uncomfortable. I mean, it goes to, what is Trump's conception of the role of the presidency? What is his conception of the civic duty of the presidency? If your job is, what is your job as the president? Provide for the national security and defense of the United States, sure. But at the end of the day, presumably you want to say what I can do to advance life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, democracy, democratic ideals. I mean, I would argue that most Americans, if you say, what do you want your president to do at the end of the day, he or she should do those things, right? Make sure we're safe, and then provide for the liberties and the bounty of democratic society and let that flourish as much as we can in the United States and everywhere else. But for Trump, it's not. He has this fascination with authoritarians and power. It is the strong man, whether that's Putin, whether it's Xi, and how, the magnificent parades that Xi has, and Duterte, the strong man in the Philippines, and, what he says goes, and Erdogan, and on and on, and all the Saudis, that now Jared is fleecing for live golf and everything else for all they can get. It isn't about, I am drawn to democratic ideals. It is, I am drawn not just to power, but to authoritarian power, to absolute power, to power that brooks no dissent, to power that snaps its fingers and has things done, to power that wields without any sort of bending the authority over the society. And so, to wheel out Putin as a character reference, a war criminal, somebody, who is not only, invaded Ukraine, but is engaging and has engaged in war crimes against civilians, who imprisons and kills dissidents, journalists, homosexuals, non-Christians, on and on and on, to hold that up as some exemplar of, here's the endorsement on the back of my book. It doesn't, he's not holding up Abraham Lincoln. He is not holding up Gandhi. He is not holding up anybody that you would think of as somebody that an American hero. Vladimir Putin is not an American hero. Xi Jinping is not an American hero. Duterte is not an American hero. Erdogan is not an American hero. MBS is not an American hero. But nevertheless, for Trump, look how strong these men are. No American should want a president. When you say, who do you admire? Whose endorsement do you want to tell us about? Picking from that basket of international authoritarians.
He relished it. When he said Putin's name, he kind of gave him a bit of a build-up. He was like the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, like he was expecting Megyn Kelly to go, "Oh, really?" And this is what worries me the most, is that, again, for me, it goes back to his mental pathology. But to be so deranged as to think that this is going to be impressive to a journalist and to the viewers, it defies all logic.
And it's not only that he values that and raises that as a positive thing. It's that you cannot, and I challenge you and all your listeners, find a single time where he has ever been critical in the slightest, in any way, shape, or form, about Putin. Hannity, early on, I think in 15 or 16, challenged him and said, Putin's a killer. And Trump's like, well, we're not so clean ourselves. Couldn't even say yes, he is. So when you get somebody who not only has this fawning admiration, but seemingly an absolute 100% unwillingness and inability to find or articulate the slightest concern or fault, I don't get that. And that's, it's worse. Anytime somebody is so absolutely blind in their view of anyone, it's concerning. But when you're doing that for somebody who is absolutely a military rival, an ideological rival, a rival on the geopolitical international stage, to have that view of somebody, ask him about faults with Macron, thousands of instances. Theresa May, same thing. Let's go down, Angela Merkel, sure, plenty of criticism. Vladimir Putin, not a one, not a single thing. And it boggles my mind. It boggles my mind that an entire party who traditionally for the last several generations in America throughout the Cold War were the party of a strong national defense and anti-communism and standing up to the Soviets through strength of our national defense, suddenly is in the thrall of this man who cannot say the slightest negative thing about Vladimir Putin.
Kim Jong-un went to see Vladimir Putin this week, went for a first visit. He hasn't actually left North Korea since before the pandemic. And, he made the long journey, and it was covered pretty widely. And they were having conversations about potential military relationship going forward. Russia needs weapons. It's kind of running out of ammunition. And North Korea, has the capability. That in itself is very dangerous. But what is more dangerous is that Donald Trump gave Kim Jong-un an Elton John album of Rocket Man and created a kind of bromance with him, which with those weird photographs of them like holding hands and walking across the demilitarized zone. And now Kim Jong is back in touch with his old friend Vladimir Putin. The way I would predict it is that if Trump were to win in 2024, he would want to be in that party. He would want to be part of that coalition. Those are the people. And the moment that you get three superpowers, people that have weapons of mass destruction together, that is very, very dangerous.
Oh, absolutely. And I think what concerns me most immediately is that I can think of fewer people. The importance of this coming election cannot be overstated to two people. One, Donald Trump, because if he's going to stay out of jail, he needs to have some return to the presidency, certainly to try and stop any federal prosecution. What that does or doesn't do on a state level, who knows? But his, not just political career, but his life in many ways depends on regaining the presidency. The other person that has an extraordinary amount riding on this is Vladimir Putin, because it is very clear, I think, that if Trump regains the presidency, that he is immediately going to push for a resolution of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Likely, whether it's, sort of freezing the lines, giving Crimea in perpetuity to Russia and what they do with, the eastern parts of Ukraine, which have been invaded, I don't know. But Trump is not going to support the continuation of U.S. military assistance to Ukraine.
Yeah, he'll give him Donbass and say, you've got that.
Right. And for Putin, who's already faced one near coup from Prigozhin, the prospect of a continuing unsuccessful invasion to his political future, to his future political survival is immense. And if Biden is reelected, that's going to pose a significant challenge to Vladimir Putin. Whereas if Trump is elected, that in many ways makes Putin's job far, far easier, let alone long-term goals of splitting the Atlantic alliance and breaking up NATO and any number of things that Trump was well on his way to doing, wittingly or not during his first administration. But to have two parties, one, a candidate for the president of the United States, two, a hostile foreign leader like Vladimir Putin with so much riding on the election, I am concerned what that looks like, that to the extent Russia was certainly involved in meddling in our election in 2016, to a lesser extent in 2020, at this point, the gloves are off for Putin. So I don't know if there's, how much more he could do or would be willing to do in this upcoming election. I'm not, I do discussion for another time about what, how much foreign disinformation and meddling plays a role compared to just the sort of innate domestic nastiness that occurs. I'm not, convinced that, it's not overblown in some cases, but I do worry how much Vladimir Putin has running on this coming election and what he will or won't do with regard to that, and what is or is not going on in terms of all of the folks who there's a logical goal just to, destabilize the United States, and to the extent they see an entire party who is saying we need to radically, tear apart the federal bureaucracy. We need to defund and dismantle the FBI and DHS and DOJ. That to a Russian propaganda seers, to a Russian intelligence agency, that's
it's like Christmas.
That's magic, right? It's like, hey, how can we help fund this? How can we help advance this? How can we help bolster and heighten this narrative in the visibility of the American and global populations? So there is I think this isn't simply a domestic thing going on. I think there are plenty of outside actors outside the United States who see a lot of this debate and see a lot of value in encouraging and funding the dissent and the sort of the conflict.
Part of the problem with when Bill Barr paraphrased the Mueller report gave the impression that there was no influence or Russian influence in the 2016 election is that provides cover for Putin to do it again. And as we know, whenever there are incidences of some kind of hacking, the security services, it all leads back to the Kremlin in one way or another. The 2024 election will undoubtedly have a huge amount of influence from Russia through the internet. Again, people don't know when they're being manipulated. It comes through Facebook and the ecosystem that they happen to operate in online. And so there are so many factors involved now in helping Donald Trump win, not least the impeachment of Joe Biden, which is, again, a diktat that's come from Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the one who's communicated through Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz and putting all the pressure on Kevin McCarthy, so he has to fold because he wants to keep his speakership. There are so many layers to this. And then Donald Trump taking an unconventional attitude towards how the law works. And instead of encourage or allowing his lawyers to kind of lead the charge, he is dictating to them what they should be doing, which is why he's trying to sue judges and district attorneys, just turning everything on its head. The result of all of this, from Russia and from Trump and from the Heritage Foundation with Project 2025, there's so many people involved, not to mention gerrymandering and redrawing of districts. The point I'm getting to is that Trump could win. Not necessarily because he's got the votes, because as we've discovered, his support is diminishing, but because the system of voting in the US is subject to so many loopholes and the potential for interference. So just tell me how secure you feel the election could be. What's the FBI doing about it? How focused are they on a repeat of 2016 and 2020 on 2024?
Well, I think they made a lot of progress. I mean, they set up a foreign interference task force just within the FBI, but also working with the community. And I think we were much better prepared in 2020 than we were in 2016. And so I don't think the prospect of a massive disinformation campaign from abroad having success, I don't think is realistic. But look, I do, the best analogy I can come up with is, America's facing a huge number of massive wildfires across the United States, which are generated in the United States, which are endemic to the United States. But yet you have Russia with 100 gallons of gasoline who is watching this. And if they want to be as malicious as possible with 100 gallons of gasoline and have free reign to kind of go in where there's some wildfire that exists, which is threatening to go out of control, to pour a little gas here, to pour a little gas there, you can do immense damage. You're not causing the bulk of these wildfires. You're not, going to have a huge say at the end of the day, whether they're all successfully contained or not. But it doesn't take a lot to cause immense mischief and damage. And I do think the structure, to your point, the structure, whether it's, a third party like No Labels or RFK Jr., the prospect is somebody, not that there isn't a greater level of support for Joe Biden, who, clearly overwhelmingly won the popular vote, but due to the weirdness of the electoral college and the sort of demographics of the way things work, and particularly third party, any number of things could cause, certainly, I think, for Trump to be elected. And what does, worry me, two big things, right? During the first Trump administration, you did have people who were historically Republican government people who came in to serve in his administration, who were not crazy, who were competent, who tried to do a good job, who tried to push back. By and large, they all left, right? By the end, they had quit, they had been fired, they weren't there, and you saw the second and third string, the mediocre white men like Jeff Clark and Ken Cuccinelli and others who are just not really the best America has to offer. That we will be lucky to get that as the starting team in a future Trump administration. You are not going to have all these, General Kelly and Kirsten Nielsen and Rex Tillerson and all these people are not going to be willing to, Steve Mnuchin, they're not going to be willing to return people of that caliber.
You'll get Mike Flynn instead.
Right. And so, too, I think there's also the other thing that worries me is the the sense that I had from the Trump campaign and the early administration is they did not expect to win. They were surprised come the morning after election when they realized they had won the White House. They had not made plans. It was, all something that Trump, I think, frankly, was trying to do to generate publicity, to generate sales of his stakes in university and charitable foundation or whatever else that he thought he could grift off of the notoriety of having won and lost the presidency. And suddenly he finds himself there. And I think particularly when you look to strategists like Bannon, this idea of chaos and remaking the administrative state, they didn't really have a plan to do it, and they lost. There were months and months and months where they scrambled to just get the administration in place. And I think they understand that was a lost from their perspective, a lost opportunity to, from day one, to quickly get in there, to boot out, sort of nonpartisan professionals, to install loyalists, one, and to particularly do that in the areas which I think they underappreciated the need to have loyalists at: the head of the Department of Justice, the head of the Department of Defense, the head of the FBI, all the people who have guns, which is scary from the perspective of if you are an authoritarian or an authoritarian desiring person, to come to the realization at the end of your last presidency, when you didn't have, necessarily the yes men, at DOD who would or would not do what you wanted to do in terms of putting down the insurrection or sending in the National Guard, having an understanding early on that very quickly we need to move to assert control over these organizations, and two, to take in, anybody across the government. You're like, well, if you donated to a Democrat based on the election records, well, we're going to, remove you from your senior executive position. Not political appointees. I'm not talking about that top level who have to get, who are appointed by the administration and confirmed by the Senate. I'm talking about career professionals, the things that make our professional bureaucracy, not a patronage system, not a corrupt sort of, thing you'd find in a developing nation that has, just rampant corruption. That is the sort of thing. And again, Anthony, nothing's hidden. You mentioned all these groups there out there now saying, here are our plans to identify these folks, to remove them, and to put in loyalists from day one. And they're saying it. It's not hidden. It's not a secret. It is absolutely being put out there. It is fundamentally undemocratic, and nobody cares. And yet, maybe you get an article here or a news mention there. Nobody's really talking about the fact that it is going on, that is absolutely what they plan to do, and that plans are being drawn up now and will be in place. But it's almost American exceptionalism, isn't it? The idea that, that'll never happen to our country. People have very short memories. I was thinking the other day about, I was making a video and I was putting some clips together of what it was like during Donald Trump's presidency. The left and progressive thinkers, Democrats, they don't go quietly. They like to protest. They like to stand up for their rights. We had Women's March. We had BLM marches. We had so much counter-protest to the Donald Trump movement. He erected that horrific fence outside it was a fortress around the White House. Then we had police brutality in untold numbers, because police suddenly felt like they could do whatever they liked because Donald Trump was in charge, and he basically said to them, you don't have to go easy on people, just go for it. We had the murder of George Floyd and Derek Chauvin thinking he could get away with it because Donald Trump was the president, even though he was being filmed by a passerby. Terrible, terrible things. The civilians being disappeared off the streets of Portland by military personnel in kind of unmarked clothing in unmarked vehicles. This is like third world stuff, and it was happening here in America under Donald Trump's presidency. That is what we have to look forward to again if he were to win. The unrest. My local high street was boarded up. There was the National Guard standing on the streets around where I live. Do people not remember that? Lafayette Square and a military helicopter being used. A report was done. It came down to like 300 feet to buzz people out of the way so Trump could go and have his photo op with the Bible. This is just horrendous. It is not the fair and free America that I moved to.
because I wanted to come to a place that was, a true kind of place of freedom. Why do people have such short memories, Peter?
I don't know. I think probably because a lot of folks are not necessarily that closely engaged in events. And so when something significant happens, they take notice, but because they're not living it day in, day out, they forget about it. I think there is a tendency, whether it's American exceptionalism, whether it's arrogance, whether it is a sort of rose-colored glasses view of American democracy and an unwillingness or being afraid to consider how bad it might become. And, it wasn't just, remember, and again, this goes to the point of who will be the guardrails in the next Trump administration? He wanted the 82nd. He's like, I want not the National Guard. I want active duty Army divisions in D.C. Bring them up. And there was huge pushback, I think, from potentially Bill Barr and from DOD, notwithstanding Bill Barr's little march through Lafayette Square that ended up, tear gassing or pepper spraying everybody, minutes afterwards. But Trump's desire, I want active duty troops on the ground right here in Washington, D.C. to put this down. He wanted that.
Yeah.
And if
parades, military parades he wanted, right, and there was pushback on that.
If you don't have people around him pushing back on that, putting alligators in the Rio Grande and, shooting people in the leg, these horrible things that people were telling me, no, that's illegal. You can't do that. When you have, the January 6th Team Normal and Team Crazy, right? When you had Sidney Powell and Mike Flynn and Patrick Byrne, what happens if that's your full-time kitchen cabinet at the White House? People like that saying crazy things. And whatever barriers in terms of the rule of law that existed, if people aren't there to do it because they don't want to, because they're not competent, because nobody who would be willing to do it is willing to serve. I think people are comfortable being comfortable. They don't want to consider how bad it might be. There is a natural reluctance to say, oh, that's overblown. It'll never get, somebody will stop it. Nobody would actually do it. But then you look and see how, well, no, actually people did do it. People actually were planning for it. And it's not this comfortable veneer of law and order and comfort. I think people don't appreciate how thin that is. And to our peril. And some of it is when was the last time, I don't think if you go through a period where you're fighting World War I as a nation or World War II, when you have the Great Depression, when you have existential challenges, I think that lends a population an appreciation of how, one, valuable the peaceful and fruits of democracy are, but two, how transient it can be if you don't actively work for it. And we've been, let's face it, we've had a global war on terror, and I don't want to minimize anybody's service in, Iraq or Afghanistan, but largely the past generation and a half have been marked by pretty peaceful, largely comfortable existences for most of us.
We've had it easy. That's a kind of way to look at it, right? It's unlike Europe, which of course, in 1939 fell to war and has daily reminders of it. The US, unless you're, living in Pearl Harbor, you don't really get that daily reminder in the same way.
Yeah. And I thought, did COVID had the potential for bringing us together? But I think even COVID divided us as a nation because you had some people somehow it broke down oddly along party lines. On the one hand, medical science, everybody go, wear a mask and get vaccinated, somehow became a partisan issue. How, never before, when we were fighting polio, that was not a partisan issue, but somehow this thing, COVID, that could have brought a nation together, a pandemic where everybody was isolated and we band together and common sacrifice for each other. And we come out together because we value our fellow man and woman. Instead, it's fuck you. I'm not getting vaccinated. You can't tell me what to do. Don't tread on me. I have got my rights. I'm not going to wear a mask. And that became a political thing. And so I don't know. I worry about our ability to come together and continue to see common ideals as a nation that transcend party. because I think we've somehow lost that.
We have to take a very quick pause, and then I'm going to come back and talk about what we can do about it and look at Joe Biden and see how he might be the solution, potentially, or some might say the problem. That's next here on The Weekend Show. Fall is planting season. It's true, many plants actually do better when planted at this time of year, but you have to know where to start. That's why I love fastgrowingtrees.com. The experts at Fast Growing Trees curate thousands of plants so you can find the perfect fit for your specific climate, location, and needs. I ordered the most beautiful lemon tree, which is absolutely thriving on my balcony. You don't have to drive around to nurseries and big gardening centers. Fast Growing Trees makes it easy to order online, and your plants are shipped to your door in 1 to 2 days. Whether you're looking to add some privacy, shade, or natural beauty to your yard, Fast Growing Trees has in-house experts ready to help you make the right selection with growing and care advice available 24/7. And like I said, my lemon tree at the moment is growing in such a way that I never thought I would have the ability to nurture a plant myself. So with the help and advice of fastgrowingtrees.com, I am very proud of my new baby. And I now only do my plant shopping at Fast Growing Trees. You should too. Even if you've never had a green thumb, they'll make you feel like you do. Over 1 million happy Fast Growing Trees customers are across the country, and plus with their 30-day Alive and Thrive guarantee, you can trust everything will be healthy for years to come. Now, listeners to this show will get 15% off your entire order when you go to fastgrowingtrees.com/weekend, but only through October 15th. That's 15% off at fastgrowingtrees.com/weekend. That's fastgrowingtrees.com/weekend. It's the Weekend Show, and we are joined by Peter Strzok. Peter, Joe Biden is suffering. There's an article out today saying that so much is doing so well under Joe Biden. And you mentioned earlier the economy is doing well, and there's various reasons to be proud of the US at this moment. And yet Americans are not hearing it, or they're not accepting it, or they don't believe it. This is a huge ask, isn't it? When you've got so much critique coming from the right, especially the leader of the Republicans in Congress and Speaker of the House announcing an impeachment inquiry into Joe Biden's financial dealings and business dealings, of which there are probably none. I mean, the guy's been in public service his whole life. He's not a businessman. And then his son being indicted for firearms use and various other tax-related issues. And that, again, the detail of it is quite simple to understand, but from the outside, for people who don't care for the detail, again, it doesn't look good. And Joe Biden has decided to take a position where he's just kind of laughing it off at the moment, especially his impeachment, because he knows it's ridiculous. So he doesn't want to engage with it. Is that the right tactic, do you think, for the commander-in-chief when something as serious as this is happening? Because Donald Trump basically admitted a couple of days ago in an interview that it's an eye for an eye. They impeached me twice. Let's impeach Biden. He basically said it was revenge.
Yeah, and clearly there is indication that Trump was very much in contact with House Republicans in terms of getting the impeachment inquiry going and, rallying support for it. So the Biden finds himself, I think, in a very difficult position, certainly when it comes to the criminal aspects, on the one hand, of everything involving Trump, and two, in the things involving his son, because as the commander-in-chief, as somebody who is the president over the Department of Justice, over the Attorney General, he's got to be very, he should be, in my opinion, what everybody other than Donald Trump, who's been president of the United States, has done, and to let DOJ operate independently, to not sort of put what would appear to be improper influence or opinion on criminal proceedings, whether against his adversary or against his son. So I think he's in a difficult spot where it comes to those things. Now, that's different from how he should say, what he should say about the impeachment. I think there's potentially a calculus that this is so empty, that there is so much a lack of any sort of allegation of wrongdoing whatsoever, that this may backfire or be used in a way that, if you look at what Jim Jordan's been trying to do with or James Comer with the Weaponization Committee, which has just been a farce, and I think, frankly, a net negative in the eyes of most, even right-wing commentators are, laughing at James Comer whenever he goes on shows saying, when are you ever going to come up with something? Perhaps there's a calculus that this impeachment will have the same result, that it will be an obviously laughable, empty exercise. But I think at what point, whether or not Biden says something, I think what's also been interesting is just there seems to have been marching orders sent out throughout the Democratic Party to not comment on any of Trump's legal woes, to not comment on anything having to do with Hunter Biden. And that I'm a little more, I don't know the wisdom. I mean, look, I'm a national security counterintelligence professional, not a political one. But I do think at some point when you have somebody who is so deeply engaged in commenting on every last aspect of the judicial process, whether it's against him, whether it's against his opponent, and and pushing for an impeachment on the one hand, and on the flip side, you have somebody who is essentially silent. There is an imbalance there. And again, going to if that imbalance, most people are not going to know about it. Most people only know about it because they hear about it from the media. And so when the media is giving air and coverage to Donald Trump and all the claims and the impeachment and everything else, there's a power imbalance that favors, it's like irregular warfare, right? The irregular warfare favors the guerrilla because the large sort of conventional force is ill-equipped to fight in that environment in that way. When you talk about this sort of political warfare where you're attacking the judicial process, where you're attacking the judicial system, where you're attacking law enforcement and saying they should be defunded and that they're corrupt, that favors Donald Trump's methods and personality, and it disfavors Joe Biden and every other president we've ever had in our nation's history. And so how you square that or sort of approach that fairly, I don't think we're doing it. And so, again, does it in the small instance of Joe Biden and his handling of how he's going to handle the impeachment, I think we'll see. I don't know. If there's nothing there, they're not going to get to anything. I mean, you can't just make up facts out of whole cloth that are not accurate. So I'm curious to see what, I have no doubt they'll try and roll this out. This isn't going to be a 2-month process. This is something that, like Benghazi, they will want to have the ability to have hearings and events through the general election. So what they come up with, though, you can't just, at some point, you can't make up something out of nothing. You can try, but it's going to have, for the Democrats, they do still sit on those committees. And so you do have people like, the Dan Goldmans and Ted Lieu's and Adam Schiff's and Eric Swalwell's and many others who are very capable of asking and exposing complete nonsense. I mean, they're not the majority, but it's not like it is just 100% Republican, no Democrat voices. And so I think the ability to sort of cast some light on the absurdity of these proceedings will be there. So, I mean, we'll find out soon enough, I think.
And the immaturity of it. That's what I find so interesting, is that the arguments are so immature. And it kind of devalues the kind of the level of intelligence on a national level, to kind of the idea that people are buying this stuff. And the problem is that the fact that Trump wants his impeachments expunged, that's something he's kind of working on. He hates the fact that he was impeached twice. So he thinks that if Biden is an impeached president, then that means that he's not so bad because they have something in common in that way. And it's just turning justice on its head, I guess, that is what I'm getting at, is that saying anything and doing anything, and they're all at it. I mean, I wouldn't mind if it was just a couple of bad actors, but it's the fact that the whole Republican Party seems to have got behind this and that they are doubling down is what makes it so very dangerous. Because, it's not really a vote when it comes to the election. It's not just a vote between Biden and Trump. You're voting for authoritarianism or true freedom and democracy. And yet these distractions are going to be the difference between a win for the Democrats and a loss.
Yeah, and what ultimate goal Power to do what at the end of the day? To have it isn't clear to me. And what's really interesting, Mitt Romney is launching a book, or maybe it's already out, but he's given a lot of interviews where he's been very critical of a lot of his Senate colleagues in particular. And what was really interesting is that he's like, Ron Johnson is just crazy. He believes all these conspiracy theories. I can work with him because he really, he believes all this crazy stuff. And so I can't really hold him in too high disregard. But then he just savages people like Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz and J.D. Vance, because he said they are all smart men who know exactly what is going on, who know exactly the existential danger to democracy that Trump represents. And nevertheless, they are willing to subordinate that knowledge and the understanding of what that is going to do and is doing to our democracy in pursuit of power, and just savages them. And J.D. Vance, I think, said he could not hold him in higher contempt, which is, for Mitt Romney, it's like, okay, that's a pretty strong statement. But those are the, and again, you look at the House, it's like, of course, you're going to get people like Lauren Boebert, who clearly what you're getting, what their background is.
The clowns.
Yes. And they were clowns, they remain clowns, and clowns they shall forever be. I mean, that's just what a certain percentage of the House of Representatives you're going to get. But in terms of thoughtful, like I guess Buck is one of the few congressional Republicans who are saying, I don't see any facts here to support an impeachment, but that's the rare exception. And I think, I don't know at what point we lost any sort of semblance of country over party, because that seems to have disintegrated. And there is, for Trump in particular, it is Trump over party, over country. It is just Trump. And I can't understand how so many people are swayed by the need for his support. And it's not his support, it's the support of his followers, that he can either make or break somebody's political futures based on his either, recommendation, endorsement, or his criticism. And that his ability to hold that absolute sway over this 20 to 30% has been just absolutely devastating to the Republican Party.
I would put it down to Christian nationalism. I think that's what kind of binds all of these factors together, because Trump is not a religious person. He's a conduit, like an empty vessel that people like Josh Hawley, who are smart, educated, know that in order to achieve the ultimate goal of a Christian or Christo-fascist nation, that Donald Trump is a really convenient mark in order to get to that point. Just say Trump's name a few times in a sentence and he'll give you his full attention. It's as simple as that. And if you read Project 2025, which is this Christian Nationalist Heritage Foundation document that is their plan for, winning the election next year and what they'll do to American society as a result of it, it is horrific reading, terrifying reading. It is the far right. It is Christian nationalism. It is trying, where possible, to put these kind of Christo-fascist ideals into every aspect of society and removing the structures and pillars of democracy, such as getting rid of the Justice Department and getting rid of school boards and associated educational establishments, so that they can teach what they want to teach and indoctrinate. And I personally feel that, and again, the media doesn't like to talk about religion or extreme views of religion. I'm not talking about moderate Christians here. I'm talking about this extremism that now has permeated its way through churches up and down the country, and where politics and Christianity combine. That is their plan. And Trump is just he is their route into that ideal.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I would add a huge amount of racism and sort of white supremacist tendencies to that. I think there's a lot of the ugliness of the, unspoken ugliness of American society that we've grappled with for, well before the Civil War and the failures of Reconstruction. But I mean, look at Trump when he comes up. I was taken by his comments both when he went to D.C. for his arraignment as well as to Atlanta, and he talked about them as dirty cities, as crime-ridden cities. What he really was saying is black cities.
Yeah.
And so that call, those dog whistles, those people, those urban elites, read the black urban coastal populations. There is a huge
Not to mention
amount
the
there.
black DAs and the black judge.
Yes. And so, and again, when it gets to, when you start talking to talk about, the third rail of the mainstream media, if you want to talk about, Christian nationalism, if you want to talk about white supremacy, if you want to imply at all that huge segments of the American population still have extraordinarily, behind closed doors, racist beliefs, that's something it's so uncomfortable to have that conversation. Some people will provide lip service on, Black History Month or Martin Luther King Day. We'll talk about it and pay homage to the great, civil rights leaders of our nation. But the reality is to go in and out and say, hey, there's a huge chunk of the American public who is attracted to Donald Trump because they are racist. They are fundamentally racist. And when he talks about the Mexican rapists, when he talks about the dirty, unsafe urban cities of Chicago and Atlanta and D.C., they hear those black cities. To bring that up, you're not going to see it or hear it, but it's the truth. It's the truth. Not everybody. You can go to any number of Republican voters who are not at all racist. Everybody's a little bit racist. I truly believe that. But to deny and somehow turn a blind eye to the fact and role of extreme religion or racism and the role that's playing in the appeal of Donald Trump, you can't turn a blind eye to that. It is there. And if we pretend it isn't, or if we just don't talk about it because that's not the sort of thing we talk about on mainstream news, that's, again, we do that at our peril.
It all goes back to make America white again. That tragically is kind of, the answer was on the hat all along. Peter, we have to finish, but I'm so grateful to you again for your expertise and your time, and hopefully we'll do it again in the future.
Absolutely. It was great to talk with you.
My thanks to Peter Strzok. I'm Anthony Davis. Subscribe to my new show Uncovered with Ron Filipkowski on Wednesdays. And don't forget, you can hear my daily podcast, 5 Minute News, every morning. So wherever you get yours, subscribe. Join me next week with a brand new special guest and more factual news stories to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with MeidasTouch.